So
We're going to call
so let's not mess around anymore. I'm going to click go live. Where's that there? Right, I shall tell you.
You're expecting two more?
Chris and Heather Kippen said they wanted to join.
Oh, right.
If they can find it.
Fine. I presume we are now live.
Yeah, take a bit of catch up. So it is now live, but it's not quite live.
Let me know when we can start.
Yeah.
Some years ago, George Pipe suggested I go and see Don Price to capture Don's early memories of ringing. This formed the basis of a newsletter article. I then planned to interview George prior to the 2019 dinner, but at the last minute he fell ill, and so that never came to pass. However, the seed was sown by George that our senior members were full of interesting memories which should not be lost, and so I thought it would be of interest to continue the idea. Today, I'm delighted to have Alan J. Frost with us. Hello, Alan. I say Alan J. Frost because our society actually has two Alan Frosts. Have you ever rung with Alan N?
Well, I knew you were going to ask this. Not that I recall. I may well have met him at a dinner, I suppose, but no, I don't know him personally.
Yeah, amazing, isn't
But
it?
that's why I know there is another one, so I always call myself Alan J. Frost. I mean, there are other Alan J. Frosts, there are other Alan John Frosts, but, in ringing terms, that's a sufficient distinction, I think.
Excellent. You were made a Lieutenant of the Royal Victorian Order, which I believe is the personal gift of Her Majesty. Can you give us some background as to why that came about?
Well, yes. The order, the Royal Victorian Order, obviously originated by Queen Victoria, for persons giving significant service to the Crown. And I suppose my significant service, if you like, was being architect in charge of the restoration of Windsor Castle after the fire.
Do tell me more about that. That sounds fascinating.
Well, as you know, there was quite a significant fire in 1992, and I was architect with a company which I still am, Donald Insall Associates, and they were known for conservation of historic buildings, so we, amongst other similar firms, were invited to tender for the work for the restoration. And our company won it. Then in our company I had done quite a few jobs on castles, Cardiff Castle, Raby Castle, Clough Castle and so on. So within the company I was asked to be in charge of the work, although I had various able sort of lieutenants, you might say, of different departments. One dealing with the royal kitchen, another one dealing with the domestic quarters, another one with masonry and so on and so forth. And the job of about 35 million, which turned out within 10% of the budget, was the controlling operational managers at Gardner and Theobald worked with us, and relations can be difficult sometimes between supervising manager and architect, but we had a very good relationship, and over 5 years, that is, it worked very well. And we had subsidiary architects to deal with different parts of the work, apart from our own company. There were amusing incidents, well, many amusing incidents, but one with English Heritage, now Historic England. They were very keen, of course, that everything's done right and proper, and one of our, I think, 92 or so meetings, Stephen Brindle threw a bit of cement mortar across the table and said, "What do you mean by using this?" I had to point out to him that in fact that was an old piece that had come off the building and we were using the correct material. Another amusing thing was we had various meetings with Her Majesty and Prince Philip, and one of them, there was a group of us in our company, and he was looking around and he was speaking to then principal and saying, why are you clean shaven? Everybody else, the architect, have got a beard. So he's quite outspoken. Another thing was the sort of intimate design of the, not the state loos, but the visitors' loos. And our instructions initially were to have doors here, doors there, and doors over. Prince Philip said, "No, do away with all those." He said, "If they want to come in and have a quick slash, they don't want to be opening doors everywhere."
It must be wonderful to actually see that sort of human side
Yes.
of the royalty.
Oh, very much so, yes. Yes.
Now, I work in insurance, and I know that when you put fires out, you put a lot of water on buildings, so I
Yeah.
suspect drying out the castle
Well,
must have been an
that's right.
incredible challenge.
That's it. The very large fire damaged area was encased temporarily so that we weren't drying out the whole of Berkshire, and that's at least 7 dehumidifiers were on the go day and night for 6 months or so, and even then some of the structure wasn't dry. At the end of the job, after 5 years, where water had percolated down in stone vaults, water was still coming out. It takes a long time to dry out. One reckons in good circumstances you dry about 1 inch a year in thickness.
Wow.
So.
Wow. It must have been an amazing piece of work to work on.
Yes. I mean, it was very enjoyable overall. It was quite hectic. I would visit at least twice a week, and towards the end of the job, I was also involved in working HBSC headquarters bank in Shanghai. So I'd fly out there for a couple of days, or maybe 3. We had a flat there, and then come back and go to Windsor Castle and do a bit of ringing in between.
What a lifestyle. What a lifestyle. Fantastic. I was talking to Phil Rogers earlier, and he said you've been a member of St Paul's Cathedral Guild since 1959, I think he said.
Roundabout, yes, 58, 59. I mean, I've actually been ringing just over 66 years now there. I came up to London in 1956 and met Alf Peck at St Luke's, Chelsea, and we got talking. In those days he was quite elderly, obviously, and a relatively genial fellow, although I gather in his earlier days he'd been very much rather different from that, However, he said, done much ringing on 12? I said, no, none at all. Well, try our light 12, he said, first of all, because at that time there were only 3 rings of 12. There was Southwark and St Paul's and Cornhill. So they would try Cornhill, the light 12. and there I went on.
So not St Mary le Bow at that time, I suppose, because they were still out.
St Mary le Bow. When I would, as until a few years ago, cycle around, and St Mary le Bow was being rebuilt with this concrete tube rising up, which eventually became the steeple.
Yeah, yeah. Any memorable peals that you've rung at St Paul's?
Well, I've rung, I forget how many now, quite a few. Yes, a 100th peal on the bells, I think, was quite memorable. It was just before lockdown. But other peals, you know, they're all memorable, really, peals at St Paul's.
Yes, absolutely. And I believe you're also an honorary member of the Westminster Abbey Company?
Yes, yes.
So what occasions have you rung for?
Well, lots. One of the, I was honoured to be able to ring for the wedding of Prince William and Catherine, which we rang 3 spliced, I think, something like that, yes, for them. And then ringing for the death of the Queen Mother. I rang the tenor half muffled there. My first peal was quite significant in a way, because I rang it just 6 weeks after first handling a bell.
Wow.
And had a very good tutor, Pat. Good heavens, I'm forgetting names all the time now. Pat Chapman, that's right. And he took me around, and I think for 6 weeks I rang at least once every day, and finished up, you know, with just bringing the treble to a peal of doubles. But it set me off on peal ringing.
Yes. So where did you learn to ring?
Kettering.
Okay.
Which is a tower that sways quite a lot, and because it was the first tower, I was quite used to oscillating towers, and that interested me really all along, so that I did a postgraduate course in conservation after my architectural course, and chose as my thesis tower movement and the act of towers and so on.
Yeah.
And that then, in due course, led on to Fred Sharp inviting me, before I was a member of the Central Council, to join as sort of ex officio member of the Towers and Belfries Committee, which I've been on, or its successor, ever since.
Wow. Wow. So I think you're the third most senior past master of the Society, after Michael Morton. People can't see, but Michael is actually sitting over here, and Michael Chilcott. So I think you're the third most senior.
Yeah.
What was the Society like when you were master?
Well, I think one sort of has to distinguish between the London ringers and the wider membership, because the wider membership have been ringing Bristol and so on, but in London it was very much restricted, and we began with Michael and Rodney Meadows and John Rock to have a sort of programme of progression, and I produced a broadsheet of, what was it, 16 methods, which that's a poor copy of,
Wow.
which was distributed round to all interested members, so that we could boost up the number of methods. And before we rang with Wilfred Williams. He was keen on ringing, and then there was almost rival band with Michael Morton, David Hilling, but ringing, because of that, it tended to increase the interest and the number of methods rung and so on.
So
I
what
think-
sort of methods were you ringing?
Well, they were mostly Cambridge type methods, but included Londinium and eventually Bristol, of course. But both the seconds place and 12th place of each method,
Right.
running through, Cambridge, Yorkshire, Superlative, Pudsey, and so on.
Right. Methods, some of those not very much rung at all
No,
nowadays.
no. In fact, another peculiarity, Stan Mason introduced double Norwich, treble rod Maximus,
Wow.
or Maximus rather.
Wow,
And,
that's
that
not wrong very
didn't
much.
really last very much.
No, indeed. Indeed. So what was the headquarters pub at that time?
Oh gosh, it varied. I mean, I can't remember names. I'm sorry. No.
It's amazing how it's moved around. Where was your country? Did you have a country meeting?
Well, yes. No, it was in Newcastle. Now, why it was in Newcastle, I couldn't say. I can only think that in previous years they must have invited the society, up to that area.
Yeah.
Can I help that?
Yes.
Yes.
Of course, Alan very kindly invited me. I was a very young member of the society to come up to Newcastle because we were invited to ring a peal at Newcastle Cathedral, where I think it was the 90th anniversary of the Durham and Newcastle Association.
Oh,
What I didn't remember that it was our country meeting. I didn't think it was. I
well,
thought.
maybe not, but
I certainly went with you to Newcastle.
Newcastle, yeah.
First time I've been that far north, I think.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about your involvement in Central Council and Tower movement and things like that.
Yeah.
I believe you wrote a thesis on the movement
Well,
of
yes,
towers.
we did just say that.
Yeah. So did it come out with anything that would surprise people?
Well, to my mind, a lot of this type of thing is common sense, but it may not be. I mean, for instance, brick towers notoriously sway more than stone towers because there are more joints, because the movement comes in the joint. But the movement can also come, and one tends to think of a tower as a vertical cantilever, but there are towers, including incidentally St Giles Cripplegate, that move from ground level upwards. You can stand at ground level and feel movement in a joint. And there are other towers like that as well, Ash and Louth and so on. But it's largely common sense. But a long time ago, there was a book, and I can't remember the name of the author of that, because he was another architect. I should remember. Wrote all about the mathematics of it, and reckoned, according to him, that Beddington Tower shouldn't be standing because of the characteristics and so on. And Michael Chilcott knew all about that, and it moved quite a bit, but it certainly wasn't likely to fall. But there are other towers where one is more alarmed. I mean, I've been at the top of St Stephen's, Bristol. I believe it has been stabilised now, but those big pinnacles at the top moved visibly. The joints opened and shut between the pinnacles and the rest of the parapet. The Roman Catholic Church at Cambridge got big arches, and if you go over those arches when they're rigging, you can see and feel those arches open and shut. Bushy is another one where hundreds of peals have been rung. I've rung lots there anyway. And only recently they've taken some panelling off one of the walls, and a huge wide crack, centimetre wide, opens and shuts whilst they're ringing.
There are obviously three cathedrals that don't have bells, and I know I was involved when I was over in the Ely Diocese looking at the feasibility of putting bells in Ely Cathedral. And generally speaking, people said there wasn't an issue with the tower. But I've often wondered whether Norwich and Salisbury, it would just be infeasible to put bells in there because of the issues. But I wonder what you thought about that.
Yes, I think that's true, because you find that the cathedrals, many of which of course were daringly built in the first place, and some spires fell down, but Norwich Cathedral, for instance, has got a tall, slender spire. Salisbury Cathedral has as well, and so on. And I think they felt they just went too far. The bells at Lichfield are in the smaller of the two. There are three spires, you know, one large one and two smaller ones, and they're in one of the smaller steeples.
For good reason.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. You were talking about some of the characters, sort of the early days of you ringing London.
Yeah.
Are there any others that particularly stand out?
Oh well, yes, lots of them. I mean, Alf Peck I mentioned. Fred Collins came up every Sunday, ran the tents at St Paul's, and he introduced me to quite a few peals. Wilfred Williams in particular, he was a cussed old soul, but I got on very well with him, and he invited me in many peals, you know, Exeter Cathedral and so on, and in his way, you know, he did quite a bit for ringing, although he was not too popular in many ways.
Yes, I think people seem to either like or dislike him.
Yes,
there were always two camps, weren't there?
Yes. And then of course Jack Phillips, the builder, ringing the 11th at St Paul's. No, they're all good characters, really. And then Harold Pitstow at the Abbey. Very right and proper, you know, it was a long ringing family going back to Saffron Walden and so on. And he was, you know, as indeed I suppose you'd say all tower captains are, you know, sort of trying to keep to the highest standards, and that was certainly so with Harold.
Yes, with places like the Abbey and St Paul's, it's challenging, isn't it?
Well, yes.
Yeah. And you mentioned long service on the Central Council. I think you've also served quite a lot on diocesan advisory committees.
Yes, I mean, again, that, as I mentioned earlier, started with gosh, the name escaped me again. I think I said it once sometime. They invited me to the Towers and Belfry Committee. And through that I then became invited to advise, first of all in St Albans, and then in London, and then in Oxford, which I still look after, although other younger interested people in that way, you know, are coming along to back me up.
Yes, it's good to have some youngsters coming along, but but equally experience you've got over all of those years is hugely valuable.
Yes, I mean there's a particularly ticklish job going on at the moment at Bishop Stortford, and it's been a long time sort of evolving in a rather unusual way, shall I say. And so we're going to, both of us, look and see how this develops and succeeds.
Yes. Do you actually see plenty of people with talent coming into that sort of arena, or is it as a lot of places struggle?
I wouldn't say a huge number. No, we're slightly scratching around, you know, to find people who are interested.
Yeah, and have the right skill sets, I'm sure. Yeah. Yes. And I suppose the other thing is that I believe you have quite a love of steam.
Ah, well, that's another subject altogether. Yes, I mean, my father, uncle, great uncle, and were engineers and ran a steam ploughing business. And so a friend of mine had a traction engine and said, why don't you have one as well? Just, and eventually I did, and became, I think, the fourth generation, to own. And over the years, I've steamed thousands of miles. And one of the occasions, of course, was in 1982, which was the centenary of the casting of Great Paul. And Andrew Wilby saying, well, why don't we reenact this? And there was an engraving of Great Paul being towed up to London from Loughborough by a steam traction engine. And so I said, well, that's sort of a good idea. And so Andrew arranged in Liverpool Street goods yard, which then existed, to make a replica bell, 10 feet diameter, 10 feet high, in timber framing and papier-mâché on chicken wire. And I went up to London with my engine and drove it through the streets to St Paul's, where a lot of the college youths and their wives or partners dressed up in Victorian costume, and we had a sort of cathedral fete at the steps of St Paul's. And for a long time afterwards, because my traction engine had got what we call strakes, strips around the wheels, which tended to sink into hot tar, you could see and feel the route we took from Liverpool Street to St Paul's.
Excellent.
And there are also other traction engine owners who are ringers, and one rally in particular, we were gathered at Shabbington in Buckinghamshire or Oxfordshire, and we would ring on Sunday and then go and steam, and went up and ran Quarterpeel in some tower in Lincolnshire, I can't remember where. But,
fascinating. But you don't still have the traction engine then?
no, sadly. Well, we've built ourselves a new house, 6 years ago now, 7 years ago, and the cash was handy. The engine was in its best condition, so in terms of value, and where one would have put it was another thing. Altogether, I was persuaded, much against my better judgment, I think, to sell it. No, in its place, I got just half a ton of 7 1/4 inch, which I built a 7 1/4 inch line when our children were small in the 70s, powered by a steam outline electric driven engine driven by a lawnmower motor, which they've still got. But thought, well, we'll upgrade to real steam, and having got rid of the engine.
And you still have that?
Oh yes, take it to Quainton Railway Centre and run it there.
Excellent, excellent. So any other hobbies that you've got?
Well, I don't know. I mean, ringing and steam are two main hobbies, really.
Two wonderful hobbies, aren't they?
And yes.
Excellent. I was just wondering if anyone else had any questions that they wanted to.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question.
Yes.
Alan, do you have any memories of ringing at St Dunstan in the East?
Yes. Of course, they were unrung for a long time, but ringable. Oh dear, again, I can't remember the name. There's one of notorious ringers. He does a lot of Stedman ringing. Would you know?
Oh, John Pladdis, perhaps?
No, not John Pladdis.
Oh.
Anyway, this particular ringer was well known in that tower and managed to. They weren't rung because there was a telephone exchange very close, and in those days, of course, they communicated, by orally through operators. So they absolutely banned ringing there, although they're ringable. But just before the bells were removed, they did allow one ring, and we rang them. Beautiful bells they were, of course.
What happened to the bells then?
Somebody else will know that. I can't remember.
Didn't they go to a vineyard in the USA or something?
Right.
Yes, I mean some bells have gone strange places. At Toronto Cathedral, where the ring at down in the Docklands.
Bermondsey.
Sorry?
St James Bermondsey.
Bermondsey, that's
Yeah.
right. And I did a tower inspection there, and they had been unrung for many, many years. And same as the church in Pimlico, St Barnabas. But it was really not practicable at Bermondsey. It was really squashed in the tower. The bearings were so close together you could hardly get at them. And so they were shipped across to Toronto. St Barnabas, of course, is still St Barnabas.
Excellent. You must have done some unusual places that you've done some inspections.
Yes, I've been up to Chime of Bells at Dunblane, Quex Park, and I can't remember any other. There are. I mean, every tower is so different. Timber towers and so on. I've got a list of about 1,000 or so, and I've also inherited Fred Sharp, is what I'm trying to think of. Fred Sharp's, all of his reports, but of course they're a sort of archival interest, they're not practical interest, because things change. One might look and see what was noted 50 years ago or something.
Yes. Excellent.
Alan, you've mentioned that you're diocesan bell advisor for 3 dioceses.
Yes.
Of which one is the Diocese of Oxford, which is very large and
Yes.
3 counties. That must mean an awful lot of work, because you're talking about probably getting on for 1,000 or more churches, aren't you? Probably
Yes.
considerably more than that.
Well, yes, it is quite. I mean,
And how on earth do you manage to?
well, a lot of things are done by email these days.
Yes.
Wherever possible, but no, I mean every day I deal with maybe half a dozen cases.
Really? Yes.
And they soon stack up if I don't keep them going.
Well, I'm sure. Yeah.
Which is why it's quite useful to have some other people, doing some of them. But no, it's enjoyable work as far as I'm concerned.
Good.
It sounds absolutely fascinating, and you've clearly given an enormous amount. I mean, not just to ringing, but to the monarchy as well.
Well,
It's been absolutely fascinating. So, Alan J. Frost, thank you ever so much for giving us your time. That's been absolutely magnificent.
well,
Thank you.
You're welcome. I didn't say anything about conducting. I'm not keen on conducting, but I do under sufferance. And with Michael, we've rung